It's the spring of 1991, and I'm on my way to Prince George's County, Maryland for the first time. My boyfriend is taking me to meet his parents, which is a little nerve-wracking because I really wasn't often the girl that somebody brought home to meet their mom. And let's just say that's because I was a little rough around the edges at this time in my life. I smoked a lot of cigarettes and drank, went to DC bars quite a bit, despite the fact that I was not 21. I had a terrible attitude. I fought with my mother constantly and really didn't care what anybody thought about me. I was impulsive and I lacked ambition. In fact, I had recently dropped out of college because my grades sucked. I didn't want to be there in the first place. I was supposed to be an actress after all. And let's just say that I was really a self-destructive mess. So it was a little surprising that this guy wanted me to meet his mom and dad. So we're on our way out there, and we get to Upper Marlboro, Maryland, and he brings me to this house. And we are greeted at the door by this tiny little glamorous lady. And she is ecstatic to see us. I mean, she hugs and kisses her son in a way that I'm just not used to. And next thing I know, she's got her arms around me, and she's, stands like a head beneath me. And she looks up at me, and she's touching my hair, and she speaks at me in this thick European accent. She says, "Sweetie, I am so glad to meet you. You can call me Panda." And then she brings her hands to her eyes and she looks up at me like this. I really don't know that if this is like some strange European gesture or if she's mimicking a panda bear, so I'm gonna make the same thing back and look down at her. And I'm hoping that it's all going okay. So we enter the house and everything is like sparkling and it's clean and it's white. I mean, there are white carpets and white sofas and white chairs and, glass cases with crystal and china in them. And I am like instantly intimidated and I am convinced that I am bringing in dirt off of my body as we walk in. There are pictures on the walls of beautiful people and a painted portrait of Panda herself when she was younger, looking just like a movie star. I am so out of my league. Well, we go upstairs and we go to the kitchen and we're having hamburgers at the kitchen table and Panda scoots her chair up really close to mine and she says, "Sweetie, I want you to tell me everything. I want to know about your family. I want to know what you're studying in school, what you want to be when you grow up." And at this age in my life, these are like really normal questions that you might ask a young person, but as I explained, I really wasn't on a great track. So I didn't have a lot of answers. I kind of like fidgeted in my seat a bunch, and eventually, I was pretty sure I had failed the test and it was time to go. But on our way out, Panda gave me a bottle of her perfume. She ran the fragrance department at Garfinkel's, and for anyone who lived here back in the 70s and 80s, that was the shit. That was the store you wanted to go to. And she said it was no trouble at all. I had plenty of samples. So I was surprised to be invited back a couple weeks later. I was surprised, first of all, that I got invited back, and second of all, I was surprised that I was excited about it because it was a Saturday night, and for me, Saturday nights were prime time. I mean, I was generally out looking for trouble on that night. But I was excited, and there was something about this lady that I was really drawn to, and I had to admit to myself that I really did want her to like me. So this time we go to her house and she has the formal dining room table set, and it is the multiple forks and spoons and the plates and the glasses and the china and cloth napkins. It is the whole 9 yards. So I'm kind of evaluating all of this and she pulls me aside and she says, "Sweetie, before we sit down, I'm going to teach you how to eat food." Now, let me say I was a little challenged at this point in my life, but I was pretty sure I knew how to eat food. But what she actually meant was with a fork and knife. You see, the Europeans, we eat food with a fork in our left hand and the knife in our right hand. We cut our food very slowly, we take small bites, and we never stab at our food. Apparently I was stabbing at my food. A little bit later, I think what I noticed the most about this experience is that, given my rebelliousness, there was something about this woman that I did not take offense at. Her tone with me was very patient and kind, her criticism was very constructive, and she had this really rare ability to soften me, which I really hadn't encountered in anyone else. And this was a really good thing. I really needed this woman. About 6 months later, I ended up pregnant with her first grandchild. So that's the really unusual story about how me, a pregnant college troubled dropout, from modest upbringings, and Panda, this classy, refined, former cabaret singer who drank from Waterford Crystal, ended up living together. We couldn't have been from more opposite worlds. I mean, we came from two totally different walks of life, and Panda was the teacher and I was the student, and for whatever reason, I had never been able to take direction from anybody in my life. I rebelled against everyone and everything, but this woman had a way of working with me that somehow made me come out a bit more. One of the most fascinating things about Panda was that she wore a skirt, high heels, and makeup every single day. When she went to the bank, she wore skirt and heels. When she went to the commissary, skirt and heels. And in the wintertime, she often wore a fur coat and skirt and heels. And so, I watched all of this, and I had no high heels when I moved in with Panda, and so she gave me a pair of hers, and she gave me a couple dresses that with room to grow into, because clearly I was going to get bigger. And about once a week, we'd have this opportunity to go out and about on town, which meant going to the mall or visiting friends, and it was like I got to put on a costume and go out with this lady every so often. And then the other thing was that she gave me a lot of makeup lessons and taught me about the importance of facial moisturizer. Baby, it is always important to look like a lady, and when your husband comes home from work, you must freshen your face a bit and brush your hair. I didn't have a husband, and things with her son and I were not looking too promising, but I pictured myself maybe in the future one day, sitting at a table, looking out the window, waiting for my husband to pull up in skirt and heels, brushing my hair, freshening my face. I was 20 years old, and I had never even imagined getting married before, but I filed these things away in case they might come in handy one day. Another amazing thing about Panda was that she had dinner on the table Sunday through Saturday. I mean, this woman never stopped. We had meat and potatoes, roast beef, chicken, and gravy without lumps. And before I knew it, I was there working with her in this lady's kitchen, barefoot and pregnant, chopping vegetables. And, I had never taken any interest in any of this domestic shit. So, I'm learning a lot. And in that kitchen, we shared a lot of stories and a lot of secrets. She told me about being home alone with her kids when her husband was away at sea. She told me about her only daughter, Peaches, who was a wild, rambunctious teenager that they had lost in a motorcycle accident. And she told me about growing up in Europe with only her father, as her mother had died when she was very young. It really struck me how courageous this lady was, and it struck me also how much time she took to talk to me and how much time she took to teach me new things. The stories I really loved were about how she met her husband. She was a glamorous nightclub singer in Cyprus, and he was in the Navy, and they saw each other across the room, and it was instant love and attraction, and it was a very passionate romance, and she ended up pregnant, and they came back to the United States and got married. And she, first time in the United States ever, this glamorous European lady is now living on a naval base in South Carolina, while her husband is away at sea, having her first baby, figuring out how to be a mom, survive in new places, and making difficult situations okay. In June of 1992, my daughter was born, and I was able to be home that year with her in Panda's house. And we shared her first smile, and her first tooth, and her first laugh, and her first steps, and her first birthday. And also at this time, I was able to go back to school. A few years later, I miraculously graduated from George Washington University, magna cum laude. I know. My daughter and I moved to Arlington a little while later, and things with her father and I did not work out, which was not surprising. But I found myself in situations that weren't too dissimilar from Panda. Figuring out how to be a mom, figuring out how to survive in a new place, figuring out how to take care of myself. And even though things with my daughter's father and I didn't work out, his parents remained this constant source of support for us. One of my final encounters with Panda was sitting at her kitchen table. We were eating pastries, and she was asking me all of the questions that she loved to ask me. Baby, tell me about your love life and all of your boyfriends. I want to hear about your job and your travels. And this time I had a lot to say, because I was a far cry from the troubled, pregnant college dropout who arrived on her doorstep. I can still see Panda. I can still hear her voice and laugh. I still sometimes remember her looking at me across the room when we were at some fancy occasion, secretly making panda eyes at me. I remember being barefoot and pregnant in her kitchen. I think of her when I make gravy without lumps. When my daughter, Peaches, and I are having dinner, I am often very tempted to school her in the very important panda lessons of table manners. And sometimes when I'm sitting in my car after work waiting for my husband, I find myself brushing my hair and putting on lip gloss.